In Willow Bay's shadowed library, a desperate whisper sparks a billionaire's heart, igniting a journey of trust and redemption. Welcome to Life Bond Tales. Like, share and subscribe this channel to get more heartwarming stories. The rain drummed a gentle rhythm against the stained glass windows of the Willow Bay Library, casting kaleidoscopic flecks of crimson and indigo across the polished oak shelves and threadbare carpet, where shadows wove intricate patterns in the late evening. Stillness. Maya stood alone in the biography aisle, her slender frame half hidden behind a creaking cart, piled high with unshelved books, her hands trembling as she gripped her phone, its cracked screen casting a faint, ghostly glow in the dim light. Her brother's voice, taut with desperation, crackled through the speaker, each syllable landing like a stone in her chest. "The hospital called again, Maya. Mom's meds are running out and they won't release more without payment. We're behind on rent and the landlord's threatening to evict us. I don't know what to do." Maya pressed her forehead against the cool, unforgiving metal of the cart, her dark braid slipping over one shoulder, her voice a strained whisper as she fought to keep it from breaking. "I'll figure it out, Sam. I'll pick up extra shifts. Maybe beg for an advance. Just don't tell Mom, okay? She doesn't need to worry." Her brother's silence on the other end was deafening, laden with the truth they both knew. Her part-time library job, with its meager paycheck, barely covered their groceries, let alone the mounting medical bills for their mother's worsening heart condition. Maya's eyes burned, but she blinked fiercely, refusing to let tears fall, her mind racing through desperate calculations. Hours she could work, old clothes she could sell, anything to keep her family from sinking deeper into despair. "I'll call you tomorrow," she said, ending the call abruptly before her voice could betray her, then leaned heavily against the shelf, her breath shallow, as if the air itself had grown too dense to carry. Across the room, near a sturdy table cluttered with architectural journals and dog-eared reference books, Ethan Harper sat, his broad shoulders hunched over a leather-bound notebook, his pen scratching hurried notes for a community center he was designing on the edge of town. At 32, he was a name in Willow Bay, celebrated for transforming vacant lots into vibrant spaces, playgrounds where children laughed, gardens where neighbors gathered, shelters that offered warmth to those with nowhere else to go. But tonight, his sharp green eyes were shadowed with fatigue, his mind still knotted from a day of grueling funding meetings and looming deadlines. He'd come to the library seeking refuge, a quiet corner to immerse himself in old blueprints and forgotten ideas, but Maya's voice, soft yet piercing with resolve, sliced through the hush like a beacon. Ethan glanced up, his gaze settling on her. Unnoticed in her faded grey cardigan and scuffed sneakers, her face partially obscured by the cart's bulk, he saw the way her shoulders curled inward, as if trying to make herself smaller, less of a burden to the world. And yet her words carried a fierce determination, a vow to fight for someone else when she had nothing left to give. Ethan's instinct was to look away, to respect her privacy, to let her pain remain hers alone, as he had with countless strangers in his carefully curated, solitary life. But something rooted him in place. Her voice, not just laced with fear, but imbued with a quiet, unyielding strength, a promise to keep going despite the odds. He watched as she straightened, wiped her face with the back of a trembling hand, and began shelving books with mechanical precision, her movements disciplined, as if each book placed was a small act of defiance against the weight she carried. Ethan's pen stilled, his notebook forgotten, as he saw her not as a library assistant but as a person shouldering a world he'd never had to navigate. He thought of his own losses, his sister Clara taken 5 years ago in a car accident that left a void no architectural triumph could fill, and wondered when he'd last truly noticed someone else's struggle, beyond a fleeting glance or a polite nod. Maya, oblivious to his gaze, pushed the cart toward the next aisle, her steps measured but resolute, each one a silent declaration that she would not break. Ethan closed his notebook, his decision crystallizing in the space of a single heartbeat, not born of pity, but from a deeper, quieter impulse, a need to act before the moment slipped away, to offer something real in a world that often looked the other way. He stood, slipping his wool coat over his dark sweater, and moved toward the library's heavy double doors, pausing only to glance back at her, her silhouette framed by the warm, amber glow of a nearby reading lamp. She was still shelving, her hands steady now, as if the act of work anchored her against the storm inside. Tomorrow, he resolved, he would return, not for journals or blueprints, but for her, for the chance to offer something that might matter, something that could bridge the gap between her struggle and a flicker of hope. As he stepped into the rain, the library's doors creaking shut behind him, Ethan felt a subtle shift, like the first crack in a wall he'd built around himself years ago, a wall that had kept him safe but alone. He didn't know her name, but he knew the sound of her voice, the way it carried both sorrow and strength, and that was enough to make him want to be someone who didn't just pass by. The morning air in Willow Bay carried the sharp tang of salt and damp earth, seeping through the library's ancient windows as sunlight filtered through the clouds, painting the old brick building in hues of gold and grey. Maya moved through the stacks with her cart, her eyes heavy from a sleepless night spent calculating how many extra shifts she could squeeze into her week, her heart heavier still from the memory of her brother's voice, pleading for a solution she didn't have. She wore the same faded cardigan as the night before, its sleeves frayed from years of wear, and her sneakers squeaked faintly on the polished floor, a small sound in the vast quiet of the library's opening hour. The biography aisle was her refuge, a place where she could lose herself in the lives of others, their triumphs and tragedies a distraction from her own, her mother's heart condition, the hospital bills piling up like unopened letters, the rent notice taped to their apartment door. She shelved a worn copy of a poet's memoir, her fingers lingering on its spine, when a shadow fell across the aisle, deliberate but not imposing. Ethan Harper stood there, his dark coat folded over, one arm, his green eyes steady and searching, not with the casual glance of a patron, but with an intensity that made Maya pause. He was out of place among the library's usual crowd of retirees and students, his presence commanding yet quiet, like a man who knew the weight of his own choices. "Excuse me," he said, his voice low and calm. "I'm not here to complain or interrupt your work." Maya's hand tightened on the cart, her pulse quickening. She was used to being invisible, not addressed directly, especially not by someone like him, whose tailored sweater and confident posture spoke of a world far removed from hers. "I was here last night," he continued, "near the journals. I overheard your call, not intentionally, but I did." Her cheeks flushed, a mix of embarrassment and wariness. She opened her mouth to apologize, but he raised a hand gently, stopping her. "Don't. You don't owe me an explanation." He reached into his coat pocket and produced a simple card, cream-colored with his name, Ethan Harper, printed in clean silver letters, and on the back, an address in the town's quieter district. "If you're open to something different," he said, "come to my studio tonight, 7:00. It's a job, not a handout. I need someone who pays attention to details, and I saw that in you yesterday." Maya took the card, her fingers brushing the smooth paper, her mind racing with questions she didn't voice. Why her? Why now? What did he really want? She studied his face, searching for pity or pretense, but found neither. His expression was open, almost curious, as if he was seeing her for the first time. "What kind of job?" she asked, her voice cautious but steady, a small act of courage in the face of uncertainty. Ethan's lips curved slightly, not quite a smile, but enough to soften the moment. "Organizing, cataloging, some research. My father's work, old. Sketches and plans, it's not glamorous, but it matters." He paused, then added, "You didn't stop last night, even when you were breaking. That's why you—" Maya's throat tightened, the weight of being noticed pressing against her ribs, not with judgment, but with something she hadn't felt in years, recognition. Ethan nodded once, a gesture of finality, and turned to leave, his steps echoing faintly in the empty aisle. She stood frozen, the card in her hand a fragile bridge to a possibility she wasn't sure she deserved. Her first instinct was to dismiss it, to assume it was a mistake or a trap. People like her didn't get offers from men like him, men who built community centers and shook hands with mayors. But as she tucked the card into her cardigan pocket, her fingers brushing the worn fabric, she thought of her mother, pale and fragile in a hospital bed, and her brother, barely 18, carrying burdens no teenager should. The library grew busier, patrons trickling in, their voices a low hum, but Maya felt apart from it all, her world narrowed to the choice in her pocket. She resumed shelving, her movements automatic, but her mind was elsewhere, replaying Ethan's words, the way he'd looked at her, not as a problem to be solved, but as a person with something to offer. By noon, she'd decided she would go not because she trusted him, but because she couldn't afford not to. The rest of her shift passed in a blur, her hands sorting books while her thoughts churned. What to wear, what to say, how to walk into a stranger's world without losing herself. As the library clock struck 6, she clocked out, her heart pounding with a mix of fear and resolve. She stepped outside, the coastal breeze sharp against her skin, and glanced at the card again, the address now memorized. The studio was a 20-minute walk, past the town's weathered storefronts and quiet streets lined with cedar trees. Maya adjusted her braid, smoothed her cardigan, and started walking, each step a quiet rebellion against the voice in her head that whispered she wasn't enough. She thought of her mother's smile, rare now but warm, and her brother's tired eyes, and she knew this wasn't just about her. It was about them, about keeping the fragile thread of their family intact. The library faded behind her, its windows glowing in the dusk, and for the first time in months Maya felt a flicker of something she hadn't dared to name. Hope, small and tentative, but real. The air in Ethan's studio carried the faint scent of cedar and ink, a converted warehouse with exposed wooden beams and wide windows that framed the twilight over Willow Bay, where the sea whispered just beyond the town's edge. Maya stood at the threshold, her borrowed scarf loose around her shoulders, her jeans and faded blouse the best she could muster from a wardrobe worn thin by necessity. The address on Ethan's card had led her here, to a street lined with quiet shops and salt-weathered trees, far from the library's familiar hush. Her heart thudded as she pressed the buzzer, her fingers clutching the card like a lifeline, her mind wrestling with doubt. What was she doing, walking into a stranger's world, trusting a man who owed her nothing? A soft click sounded, and the door opened to reveal Clara, a woman in her 50s with warm brown eyes and a crisp linen shirt, her smile gentle but professional. "Maya, welcome. I'm Clara, Ethan's project manager. He's expecting you." Maya nodded, her throat tight, and stepped inside, her sneakers silent on the polished concrete floor. The studio was alive with purpose, walls lined with blueprints, tables cluttered with models of parks and community centers, shelves heavy with books on design and history. It wasn't cold or sterile like she'd feared, but warm, intentional, a place where ideas took root. Clara led her past a drafting table to a cozy corner room, its walls adorned with framed sketches, each one a vision of a building that seemed to breathe community. "Wait here," Clara said, gesturing to a chair beside a small table set with a teapot and 2 cups. "Ethan will be with you soon." Maya sat, her hands clasped in her lap, the quiet amplifying her nerves. She felt small, out of place, a library assistant in a world of architects and dreamers. 10 minutes passed, each tick of a distant clock stretching her resolve, until Ethan appeared, not in the polished coat from the library, but in dark jeans and a navy sweater. His presence, softer, more human. "Thank you for coming," he said, his voice steady as he took the seat across from her. "I wasn't sure you would." Maya met his gaze, her wariness softened by his honesty. "I wasn't sure either," she admitted, her voice quiet but firm. Ethan poured tea, the steam curling between them, and leaned back slightly, studying her not with judgment but with curiosity. "I want to offer you a job," he said. "Temporary, fair pay, no strings. You'd live here in a guest room upstairs and work with Clara to catalogue my father's architectural sketches and community proposals. They're a mess, notes, plans, letters. I need someone who notices details, who doesn't quit when it's hard. That's you." Maya's breath caught, the offer both a lifeline and a leap into the unknown. "Why me?" she asked, her eyes searching his for the catch. Ethan paused, his fingers tracing the rim of his cup. "Because last night you were falling apart, but you kept going. Most people stop, you didn't. His words landed softly, stirring something in Maya she'd long buried, the belief that she was more than her struggles. She thought of her mother, frail in a hospital bed, and her brother shouldering burdens no teenager should, and the weight of their need pressed against her doubt. "I have a job at the library," she said, testing him. Ethan nodded. "I spoke to your supervisor. They'll hold your position if you take this. It's part-time there, Maya. You're stretched thin. This is steady with health coverage while you're here." Her eyes widened slightly. He'd thought this through, not as a whim but as a plan. "What's the catch?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Ethan's gaze didn't waver. "No catch. One rule. Don't apologize for being here. Not for needing this. Not for who you are." Maya's chest tightened, his words cutting through years of shrinking herself to fit others' expectations. She thought of her stepfather's voice, cold and cutting, telling her she'd never be more than a maid, a nobody, and how she'd believed him until now. The studio's warmth wrapped around her, the hum of possibility in its walls, and she felt a shift, not safety but a beginning. "I need to send money home," she said, her voice steadier now. "You'll be paid weekly in advance," Ethan replied. "You set the terms for what you need." A long silence stretched, not heavy, but alive with choice. Maya looked at the tea, untouched, and then at Ethan, his face open, waiting. "Okay," she said finally, the words small but resolute. Ethan extended a hand, his grip firm yet gentle, and she took it, her palm calloused from years of work, but steady in his. Clara reappeared, her smile brighter now, and led Maya upstairs to a guest room, simple with a soft quilt, a desk by a window, and a single lavender sprig in a vase. "This is yours," Clara said. "Unpack, rest. We start tomorrow." Maya stood alone in the room, her few belongings in a worn backpack, and touched the quilt, its texture grounding her. She thought of her mother's tired smile, her brother's worried eyes, and the card still in her pocket, now a promise kept. The studio below hummed faintly, a world she was part of, if only for now. She sat on the bed, her heart racing with fear and hope, and for the first time in years she didn't feel like she was running out of time. Downstairs, Ethan stood by a window, watching the sea's distant shimmer, thinking not of blueprints, but of Maya, her quiet strength, her guarded eyes. He didn't know her story, not fully, but he wanted to, not to save her, but to learn who she was when the weight lifted. The rain had stopped, and the night was clear, stars piercing the dark like small, stubborn lights. The studio's high, ceilings echoed with the soft hum of morning, sunlight streaming through tall windows to dance across blueprints and scattered sketches, while the faint scent of coffee and fresh paper filled the air of Ethan's converted warehouse in Willow. Pay? Maya had been there for weeks, her days settling into a rhythm that felt both foreign and grounding, mornings with Clara in the kitchen, brewing tea and reviewing schedules, afternoons in a sunlit archive room sorting through Ethan's father's architectural legacy, and evenings wandering the studio's quiet corners, her thoughts unfolding like petals in the absence of fear. Her guest room upstairs, with its soft quilt and lavender sprig, was no longer just a place to sleep, but a space where she could breathe, where her few belongings, a photo of her mother, a notebook of half-finished sketches, felt like they belonged. She wore a borrowed sweater from Clara today, its deep green a contrast to her usual faded clothes, and her braid swung gently as she moved between shelves, her hands steady as she catalogued faded plans for community gardens and libraries. Never built, each sketch revealed a man who saw buildings as more than structures, but as promises of connection. And Maya found herself pausing over handwritten notes, her eyes tracing dreams that mirrored her own quiet hopes. Clara, ever patient, taught her to read architectural symbols, while others in the studio, a carpenter with a limp, a former teacher turned volunteer, shared stories of their own second chances, creating a tapestry of lives rebuilt. Ethan was a constant presence, not hovering but there, his green eyes catching hers in passing, his questions about her work thoughtful, never intrusive. One afternoon, as she sorted a folder of letters tied with twine, he joined her, leaning against a table, his navy shirt rolled to the elbows. "Find anything worth keeping?" he asked, his tone light but curious. Maya held up a sketch of a playground, its margins filled with notes about children's laughter. "This," she said, "feels like he was designing joy, not just swings." Ethan's smile was small but real, and he sat across from her, sharing stories of his father's late-night ideas, his voice softening when he mentioned his sister, Clara, whose death had left him building walls instead of bridges. Maya listened, her hands still, and dared to share a piece of herself, how she'd sketched dresses as a girl, dreaming of a shop where no one felt small. The air between them shifted, not charged, but warm, a trust growing in the spaces where words weren't needed. She began to sketch again in her notebook, simple designs for clothes, and Ethan noticed leaving a small box of pencils on her desk one morning, no note, just quiet belief. The studio became her haven, its people a family she hadn't expected, but the outside world loomed, her mother's health a constant ache, her brother's texts a reminder of bills unpaid. She sent money home weekly, Ethan's advance payments a lifeline, but the fear of losing this fragile piece gnawed at her. One evening, Clara invited her to a community event at the town square, a celebration of Ethan's latest project, a renovated shelter opening its doors. Maya hesitated, her stepfather's voice echoing in her mind, calling her worthless, but Clara's gentle insistence won out. She wore a dress she'd mended herself, its blue fabric soft against her skin, and stood among the crowd, her heart swelling as Ethan spoke of homes for those who'd lost theirs. His eyes found hers from the stage, a fleeting connection that steadied her. But as the event wound down, a woman nearby whispered, pointing at Maya, her words sharp, "Isn't that the girl from the scandal? Her stepfather's arrest was all over the news years ago." Maya froze, the memory flooding back. Her stepfather's theft, the police questioning her, the accusations that clung like damp rot despite her innocence. The whispers spread, eyes turning and her chest tightened, the square's lights blurring as shame threatened to swallow her. She stepped back, ready to flee, but Ethan appeared, his presence calm, unyielding. He didn't touch her but stood, close, his voice cutting through the murmurs as he addressed the crowd. "You've heard rumors," he said, his tone even but firm. "Let me tell you about Maya. She spent weeks preserving my father's work, bringing order to chaos most would ignore. She sends every dollar home to her family, not because she has to, but because she chooses to. She's here, building, something real, and if you judge her for a past that wasn't hers, you're missing the point of tonight." The crowd hushed, some nodding, others looking away, and Maya's breath caught, not from fear but from the weight of being defended, seen. Ethan turned to her, his eyes soft but resolute, and she felt the ground steady beneath her. They left, the square together, the night air cool against her flushed cheeks, and as they walked back to the studio she stopped under a street lamp, her voice quiet but clear. "You didn't have to do that." Ethan met her gaze. "Yes, I did. Not because you needed saving, but because you deserve to be known for who you are." Maya's eyes shimmered, but she didn't cry. Instead, she nodded, a silent thank you. Back at the studio, she sat in her room, the event's weight lingering, but so did Ethan's words, his belief a shield against the past. She opened her notebook, her pencil moving across a new page, sketching not a dress but a garden, a place for others to grow. Downstairs, Ethan stood by a window, the sea's rhythm a quiet companion, thinking of Maya's strength, her guarded smile, and how she made him want to be more than a man who built things. He wanted to build with her. The studio hummed with possibility, its walls holding their story, fragile but growing like a seed breaking through stone. The Willow Bay community event glowed under strings of fairy lights, the town square transformed into a celebration of Ethan's newly opened shelter, its fresh paint and warm windows a beacon for those seeking refuge. Maya stood near a wooden table laden with cider and pastries, her navy dress, stitched with care from second-hand fabric, swaying slightly in the coastal breeze, her braid loose from the evening's bustle. She clutched a small notebook, her fingers tracing its edges, a habit born of nerves as she watched families and neighbors mingle, their laughter mingling with the soft crash of distant waves. The studio had become her anchor these past months, its archive room a place where she'd uncovered not just Ethan's father's dreams, but her own. Her sketches of gardens and dresses filling pages once left blank. Ethan's quiet belief, Clara's steady guidance, and the studio's patchwork family had woven a fragile hope into her days. But tonight's crowd stirred unease, their unfamiliar faces a reminder of the world beyond her safe haven. Her mother's latest hospital stay weighed heavy, her brother's texts sparse but urgent, and though Ethan's weekly payments kept them afloat, Maya felt the familiar pull of survival, the fear that this new life was too good to last. She smiled politely as Clara introduced her to a local teacher, her voice steady despite the knot in her chest, but her eyes kept drifting to Ethan, his charcoal suit sharp yet unassuming as he spoke with donors, his glances toward her like quiet assurances. The event's host, a councilwoman with a warm smile, took the stage, praising the shelter and Ethan's vision, and Maya clapped along, pride flickering for the man who saw potential where others saw ruin. But as the speeches ended and a projector flickered to life, displaying photos of the shelter's journey, a murmur rippled through the crowd. A grainy image appeared, not of the shelter but of Maya 3 years ago, standing outside a courthouse in her old library uniform, her face pale beside a lawyer and her stepfather, his scowl etched in memory. The caption read, "Cleared of. Theft allegations tied to family case, no evidence." Whispers snaked through the square. "That's her, isn't it? The maid's daughter?" And Maya's heart plummeted, her breath shallow as the old shame roared back, the accusations that had trailed her like shadows despite her innocence. Her stepfather's crimes, stealing from his employer, dragging her name into the mess, had cost her friends, jobs, trust, and now they threatened to unravel the life she'd built here. Her notebook slipped to the table, her hands trembling. And she stepped back, the urge to run overwhelming, the fairy lights blurring into streaks of gold. Before she could move, Ethan was there, his presence a quiet force, his hand not touching her, but close enough to ground her. He stepped to the stage, taking the microphone from the startled host, his voice calm but cutting through the murmurs like a blade. "You've seen a photo," he said, his gaze sweeping the crowd, unflinching. "Let me tell you about the person. In it, Maya spends her days preserving my father's work, bringing order to dreams most would overlook. She sends every dollar home to her family, not out of duty, but love. She's built a space in our studio where others find purpose, and she does it with a strength most of us can't imagine. If you think a headline defines her, you haven't met her." The square fell silent, the whispers replaced by nods, some eyes softening, others averted in shame, and Maya's pulse steadied, not from rescue but from the power of being seen, truly seen, for who she was. Ethan stepped down, his expression soft but resolute, and met her gaze, a silent question. "Are you okay?" She nodded, her throat tight, and as the event resumed, she stayed, her shoulders straighter, the notebook back in her hands. They left together later, the night air sharp with salt, the town's lights fading behind them as they walked toward the studio. Under a street lamp, Maya stopped, her voice low but clear. "Why did you do that? You didn't have to." Ethan turned to her, his eyes steady. "I did, because you're not your past and they needed to know that. You deserve that." Her eyes shimmered, but she held his gaze, the weight of his words settling deep. "It still follows me," she whispered. The admission raw. "I hate it." Ethan stepped closer, his voice softer. "It doesn't define you, it shows you kept going, and that's why I'm here." Maya's breath caught, the space between them alive with something unspoken, not just gratitude, but a bond forged in quiet moments, shared stories in the archive room, pencils left on her desk, glances that lingered. "What if it had been true?" she asked, her voice barely audible. Ethan didn't hesitate. "I'd still be here because who you are now, what you choose, matters more," says. Her heart swelled, and she reached for his hand, her fingers tentative but sure, and he took it, his grip warm, steady, a promise without words. Back at the studio, Maya climbed to her room, the event's echoes fading as she sat by the window, the sea's rhythm a distant lullaby. She opened her notebook not to sketch but to write a single line: "I am not my past." Downstairs, Ethan stood in the archive room, his fingers tracing a sketch Maya had organized. A playground his father had dreamed of, now alive because of her care. He thought of her eyes tonight, fierce despite the pain, and knew he wasn't just building shelters anymore. He was building a life, one where she belonged, not as a guest but as a partner. The studio's walls held their story, its beams sturdy with trust, and as the moon rose over Willow Bay, Maya and Ethan, separated by flaws but bound by choice, felt the same quiet certainty. They were no longer alone. The morning of the shelters. Grand opening in Willow Bay dawned crisp and clear, the sky a soft blue over the freshly painted building, its wide windows reflecting the sea's shimmer and the laughter of children already exploring its garden. Maya stood at the entrance, a clipboard in hand, her white blouse and navy skirt simple but elegant, her hair loose for once, framing her face in gentle waves that caught the sunlight. The shelter, named Haven House for New Beginnings, was Ikti, a dream made real, its rooms filled with books, sewing machines, and spaces for learning, a testament to Ethan's vision and Maya's quiet determination. Over 6 months, she'd overseen every detail, from the reading nook's cozy cushions to the upstairs studio where her community workshops would thrive, while Ethan handled permits and budgets, their late-night planning sessions forging a partnership deeper than words. Today, the square buzzed with guests, families, donors, neighbors, even faces from the community event months ago, their cautious admiration now open warmth. Maya's heart raced, not with fear, but with pride, though the weight of her mother's fragile health and her brother's recent move to join them lingered, a reminder of the life she was building for them all. She wore a small pendant, a gift from Clara, its tiny anchor a symbol of the stability she'd found in the studio's family. Ethan watched her from across the garden, hands in his pockets, his charcoal sweater casual, but his eyes bright with something more than pride, respect, love, a certainty that had grown in quiet moments, from shared sketches to her fierce defense of a child's drawing in a workshop. The ceremony began, Mara speaking of community's power, the carpenter sharing how the studio saved him from despair, and, to Maya's surprise, Ethan's mother, Lillian, offering brief, heartfelt words about rebuilding trust. Then the host turned to Maya, her name echoing through the microphone, the woman who made Haven House real. She stepped to the stage, her hands trembling, but her voice clear, each word a step into her own strength. "I used to think surviving was enough," she began, her gaze sweeping the crowd, "that if I kept moving, kept working, kept my head down, I'd be okay. But survival isn't living. You need safe places, people who see you, not your mistakes. Haven House isn't about rescue. It's about rebuilding, together." Her eyes met Ethan's, his smile a quiet anchor, and the crowd erupted in applause, their cheers a warmth that settled deep in her chest. As she stepped down, Ethan was there, his hand finding hers, his touch steady but deliberate. "One more thing," he said to the crowd, his voice calm but resonant, and Maya's brow furrowed, confusion giving way to a flutter of anticipation. As he turned to her, his other hand revealing a small velvet box. The square hushed and Ethan's eyes, green and unwavering, held hers alone. "I used to think success was walls, buildings, deals, control," he said, his voice softer now for her. "I was wrong. It's doors, letting the right people in, staying when they do. Maya, you didn't save me. You showed me I could be someone worth staying for. I'm not offering a title or a plan already written. I'm offering this because every day since you walked into my life, I've chosen you, and I want to keep choosing you. Will you marry me?" The box opened, revealing a ring, white gold, delicate with a small stone, its design a perfect echo of a sketch she'd doodled in her notebook months ago, a dream she'd never shared. "How?" she whispered, her voice catching. "I found it," Ethan said, his smile gentle. "I had it made because it was yours before I knew it was mine to give." Tears shimmered in Maya's eyes, but her smile was radiant, sure. "Yes," she said, The word a vow, and the crowd roared. Her brother Sam rushing from the sidelines to hug them, shouting, "She's stuck with you now." The ring slid onto her finger, a perfect fit, and Maya laughed, the sound free, unguarded, a melody Ethan knew he'd cherish forever. The celebration spilled into the afternoon, guests exploring Haven House, children painting murals, Clara leading a sewing demo. Maya and Ethan moved through the crowd, hands linked, her pendant glinting, his ring catching the light. As dusk fell, they slipped away to Haven House's steps, barefoot, the grass cool beneath them, the wind carrying the scent of cedar and salt. They sat close, her head on his shoulder, his arm around her, the world quiet except for the trees' rustle and their shared breathing. "We did it," Maya murmured, her voice soft with wonder. "No," Ethan said, kissing her hair, "you did. I just stayed still enough to be changed." She smiled, her fingers tracing the ring, its weight a promise, not a burden. They didn't speak of wedding dates or plans, only sat, two people who'd chosen each other through pain and possibility, their love a quiet defiance of the past. Maya thought of her mother, stronger now, and Sam starting college, and knew this wasn't just her victory but theirs, a family rebuilt. Ethan thought of his sister, her laughter in the wind, and felt her blessing in Maya's warmth beside him. Haven House stood behind them, its windows aglow, a home for others to begin again, its sign, carved by the carpenter, proof that broken things could mend. Maya's notebook rested beside her, its pages full of gardens, dresses, futures. She'd dared to dream, and she knew she wasn't just accepted but trusted, not just loved but chosen. Ethan's hand tightened around hers, his heart full not of plans but of her, the woman who'd made him want to stay, not for what he could build, but for who he could be with her. The stars blinked above, small lights in a vast sky, and in that moment they were enough for each other, enough for the life they'd shaped together forever.